let's continue now. So this for the refuah shlema for all the cholim of Klal Yisrael, and anyone that needs help. Let their lives be easier.
Thank you.
And okay, so continuing here with the Sfira Omer. So the Sfira Omer. We started counting from the second night of Pesach until Erev Shavuot, and it's always done. Should always be done after nightfall. If it is done after sunset, one has fulfilled his obligation, but b'di'evet. You in a minyan, that's okay. You can do that in a minyan, but if you're doing it by yourself, you should rather wait till nightfall, till 3 stars come out, the time that like Shabbos comes out, or if you see 3 stars in the sky, then you can say it. If one forgets to count at night, he counts in the morning without a bracha. If he forgot to count an entire day, he counts the rest of the days without a bracha. If one is in doubt whether he counted or not, he counts subsequent days with a bracha. If before counting, someone asks you, what is today's count? Say to him, yesterday was. If you mention the day of today, you have actually counted. You fulfilled the mitzvah and you can't say the bracha for that day. Bracha must precede the verbalization of the day. Lechatchila, preferably the counting should be done standing, but if done sitting, one has fulfilled his obligation. According to the Levush, one must say the counting by himself, and therefore another Jew cannot be motzi him. The Pri Chadash, however, is lenient. Therefore, it is advised to act in accordance with the suggestion of the Chaya Adam. If one intended to be yotzi on one's friend's account, he should count again without a bracha. There's a couple more. Let's continue, and then there's stuff on Shavuot. So, okay.
All right, let's start the share. I just don't know where Gavin is. Gavin?
Just carry on. Just sorting out something for my back. I'll be a second.
All right, so guys, listen, I wanted to ask you something as a matter of interest. I'll tell you what I've never understood about counting the Omer, is that obviously it deals with 49 different aspects of character traits from the 7th Sfirot. So you've got Gevurah Shoba Chesed and Chesed Shoba Gevurah, for example. I don't know why there's never been an emphasis on coming out with a daily series for about a half an hour on what that exact midah is, because the entire point of being a Jew, apart from the holy mitzvahs, is also improving your midot. And since that entire 49 period is about midot improvement, it seems like none of the rabbis have ever emphasized or come to the nuanced explanation of how the one format differs from the other by taking those 2 words. In other words, strength within kindness and kindness within strength. And in other words, nobody's putting any effort into that. I just don't know why. It's so important. There's no books on it, nothing. Anyway, that's just my personal surprise. I've got a lot of surprises. All right, guys, I tell you what, we are going on to new stuff. Well, it's the same subject, but onto new material. So we're on the 69th daf, Yeshakayach. So the Gemara analyzes the statement of Rav Yochanan that he responded to the previous discussion in his argument with Reish Lakish, because the text itself stated, Rav Yochanan said, if a thief stole some property and the owner did not yet despair of recovering it, neither of them, neither the thief nor the owner can consecrate it. Why? Because the thief cannot consecrate it because it's not his, because the original owner did not despair of getting it back. And the owner cannot consecrate it because it's not in his possession. So the Gemara actually asks, but did Rav Yochanan indeed say so? Why Rav Yochanan said, because it's what the Gemara generally does, guys, is it looks for consistencies. So if Rav Yochanan said something different, Kev, you're falling asleep again. You didn't have...
No, I'm going to stand up.
Thanks.
I just got back.
Okay.
That's why.
So what happens, Kev, is the Gemara looks for inconsistencies or differences of opinion where the rabbi might have held a certain position in one particular part of Shas, and he held a completely different position in another part of Shas. So it's not that they're calling him a hypocrite. They want to actually understand why there's a conflict of opinion on the same issue. And that's what the Gemara often is about, is to try and have some sort of consistency and come to a point of final agreement. But in order to do that, the Rabbonims themselves have to be consistent within their own opinion, which they are. It's just sometimes an explanation is needed in terms of their thought process, and then certainly a consistency with other rabbis in terms of the final halacha analysis. So now it's saying, did Rav Yochanan really say that statement across? And the halacha accords with an anonymous Mishnah. So I wanted to explain to you this concept of an anonymous Mishnah. Do you know why there is an anonymous Mishnah? Why does the Gemara do it? Do any of you know? Guys?
Why they're not naming the author of the Mishnah?
Correct.
That Mishnah. Maybe it's a bit controversial, or
good, and therefore
they don't want to shame him or undermine. He might be one of the giants, one of the Tanoim or Amoraim, and it would undermine his kavod, maybe.
Okay, so you're on the right track, except that if it's one of the greats and he's got a lone opinion, we quote it because he obviously is in high esteem and his opinion weighs heavily. It doesn't mean that that's the overall consensus, because the majority in most cases rule, but he's certainly got validity to his opinion. But it's generally a case where Rebbe was the Tana that redacted the Mishnah. In other words, he put it together and organized it, etc. It was originally oral, but he made it into written, structured form. And when he felt that an individual sage's opinion should be accepted as halacha, because Rebbe obviously was accepted and not disputed as far as his opinion is concerned, so certainly he was in a position where he was allowed to put together with Rav, you had Rav Yehuda Nasi, and then there's certain parts that were redacted, etc. So when an individual sage had an opinion that Rebbe felt should be accepted as halacha, he recorded it in the Mishnah without attribution. Why? Because if we attribute it to a particular rabbi's opinion or sage's opinion, then what happens is that there might be certain rabbis that say, oh, well, I don't hold by that. And he did that in order to give the impression that the ruling reflected the consensus of a plurality that should be followed. That's according to Rashi's explanation. In other words, that it was an opinion that was accepted by all. But that's why we have an anonymous Mishnah. In other words, let me give you an example. Say a particular rabbi was not accepted by a certain group in all opinions, but in fact, Rebbe agreed with this anonymous, this non-anonymous individual opinion because that was the halacha. Certain people would choose not to follow it unless it was anonymous. So whenever Rebbe said it's anonymous, it means don't question who it is. It's one of the greats. That's the halacha, and follow it. Don't start picking at it. Do you get what I'm saying? So that is a rule to state that whenever you see an anonymous Mishnah, you have to follow it. You generally have to follow it. Okay. So how does this affect things? Is that if the halacha accords with the anonymous Mishnah, this is the Mishnah of Ma'aser Shena, chapter 5, verse 1, as we said yesterday. What does that Mishnah say? In the case of a fourth year vineyard, they would mark it with clods of earth. Okay? Now, I'm going to explain what this is saying, is that basically the Gemara says that it's forbidden to eat fruits of a fourth year vineyard outside of Jerusalem without redeeming them. We already went through that, right? So what would happen is when the Gemara says, in the case of a fourth year vineyard, they would mark it with clods of earth. What it's saying is they would place clumps of earth or clods of earth on the vineyard's surrounding borders. Why? In order to identify to any passers-by as a fourth year vineyard. And that would mean that the fruits are prohibited without redemption. So it's a warning sign that, it's one thing to steal. I mean, that's bad enough. But this cannot be eaten outside of Jerusalem without it either being taken to Jerusalem, this particular produce, or it being redeemed in terms of coins. Now, you can't rely on the discreet ones to pay on your behalf. If you had to go to the owner and say, listen, can I give you some coins and take the grapes? That's possible. But certainly as far as that's concerned, it would have meaning. And when would it have meaning, guys? Like if remember that in the Shemitah year, for example, is that the ground becomes ownerless, so that you can't yourself benefit alone from the produce. You can't benefit from the produce. So the poor people can. They can take it and benefit from the produce there. My question on that Gemara is that I thought that all Israelites couldn't benefit on any produce in the seventh year of Shemitah, whether they're poor or not. But evidently, in those times, the poor could. It's just the owner can't sell it. Okay? So why the clods of earth are there is just as a warning sign that there are other factors, not only on that year, but in other years, that it's you can't use it. Okay, so it's a warning sign. So those clumps of earth were used to identify the fourth year vineyard. So that's a sign. So the Gemara interrupts and says, why does it use clumps of earth? What's the symbolism? Okay. It says this is a sign that a vineyard is similar to earth. Just as with respect to earth, there's benefit to be derived from it eventually. What do we mean eventually? Is that there's a time period. Is that after you plowed it, you planted and harvested it, according to Rashi, those things take time. And just like it takes time in order to get the benefit, so to here, you can use the fourth year produce, providing you take the time to go to Jerusalem and eat it there. So it's off limits, basically, out of Jerusalem. Okay? But it's just basically, so then that's a particular sign for a vineyard. And so too with this vineyard, when it will be redeemed, it will be permitted to derive benefit from it. So it's saying, providing although you can't benefit from the fruits now, you can benefit after they have been redeemed, either by the owner or if you've taken them to Jerusalem with the owner's permission. Now it says, there's also other areas that are marked, an orchard of Orla. Now, I don't know what Orla was. I thought an Orla was basically, it's basically, Kevin, it said it in Vayikra, Leviticus chapter 19, verse 20. And it just described an Orla as an orchard, but I don't know if it's an orange orchard, an apple orchard. I have no idea. It might just be the word orchard in general. But basically, they marked with chassis. Guys, do you know what chassis is?
No.
Okay, so chassis.
How do you spell that?
It's SHARSIS.
No, chassis, no.
So it could be chassis. In other words, if I looked at the Sephardi way, chassis. So what it actually means is it's shards of clay, tiles. So why do they use for an orchard shards of clay? Because the Gemara explains that that's a sign that an orchard is similar to chassis. So just as chassis is something that there's no benefit to be derived from it, so too the Orla orchard is something that there's going to be no benefit to be derived from it. So what it's saying is, look, if you're basically planting in clay or shards of clay or whatever the case may be, any sort of crop, it's not going to yield much. It's not even going to yield enough produce to replant the area the following season. Does that make sense? In other words, it's the worst soil to put it in. It's just like you're never going to derive benefit from it. You can't derive benefit from an orla, from an orchard. What does that mean? So it's not that you can wait for it to be redeemed. As far as I understood, the only thing that you can do with that is actually, I'm assuming take it to Jerusalem and eat it. I might be wrong. Maybe you can't derive any benefit at all from it. But you can't deconsecrate it with coins, that's for sure. In other words, at least the orchard, you can pay coins and take those coins to Jerusalem. But I think as far as the orchard is concerned, you have to take that actual fruit to Jerusalem. But I don't know if that fruit you could even benefit from, or that has to go directly to the coin. I'm not 100% sure, but passers-by certainly can't derive benefit by deconsecrating it with coins, that's for sure. So that's why it's compared to shards of clay in terms of the visible sign outside the orchard, okay? Now, the Gemara returns to the citation of the Mishnah, and it says, and a plot of grapes they would mark with lime. So why did they put lime? Because lime gets white, like bones, like human bones. It's actually a dyeing agent, like peroxide. So whenever you saw a rock area that was white like bones, you know it was a burial plot. So what does that have to do with untouchable? It will let any Cohen know, Gavin, that you can't go near that area because they're graves. It was an identifying mark to beware that there's grave sites near there. Okay? So what does this all have to do with Rabbi Yochanan? Well, we were learning about a 4th-year vineyard and the discrete ones. And if you remember, about if after it was stolen, you still have enough control over an item that's not in your possession to redeem with coins. Or if you can't control something that's out of your possession because it's been stolen. In other words, how can you assign something as far as Rav Yochanan is concerned that's not in your realm of control? Because in the Mishnah, he was basically saying, look, it's not the thief because the owner hasn't spared. Okay? It's not the original owner because he doesn't have it in his possession. So the discrete ones used to redeem the Maisa Shani and the Shavera and the 4th-year produce with coins in order that people that were stealing it weren't actually transgressing. So what happens is that item got deconsecrated and you had to take those coins to Jerusalem. Does that make sense? So that was the Kerem Reveya. Okay? So what it's saying is, yeah, okay, so it's going through gravestones and everything else, but what it actually comes to discuss is this area of things that are not allowed until they've been taken to Jerusalem or paid in terms of redemption. So that's the argument. What happens if it's stolen? Can it be redeemed at that point because it's not in your control? The thief took it. Rav Yochanan says you can't because you can only give away or sell or have some sort of utility if it's in your possession. So what's the issue here with this anonymous Mishnah? Well, I'll tell you what the issue is that the Gemara is asking how Rav Yochanan can disagree with it. Because if Rebbe redacted the Mishnah and he said it's an anonymous Mishnah, Rebbe did that in order that everybody follow that Mishnah of the Halacha. In other words, you can't refute it. So how come Rav Yochanan can turn around and refute it when that was the one that discussed about the discrete ones deconsecrating that vineyard with a coin equivalent to take to Jerusalem after somebody stole it? It seems to disagree with Rav Yochanan, and because it's an anonymous Mishnah, you can't say that Rav Yochanan can choose not to hold by that opinion. Because according to Rebbe, the whole reason the Mishnah is anonymous is that you have to hold by that opinion. So what does Rav Yochanan do? You understand the question, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. So then the Gemara cites, look, maybe there's another way to say it. Now, there was an end explanation given by Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So in other words, if the anonymous Mishnah was concluded by Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, it's possible that Rav Yochanan can have a different opinion to Rav Shimon ben Gamliel because it's not an anonymous Mishnah. In other words, it's not a unilateral agreement. Does that make sense according to Rebbe? It's possible. So what did we learn? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said, when were these words said? In other words, he's commenting on the anonymous Mishnah. So he said, in other words, the question was, when do we mark the 40th vineyard and all our orchard to identify them for passers-by? In the Shemitah year. Okay? Now, the Shemitah year occurred every 7th year, and the Torah commands after that anything that grows on a person's property during that year be left free for anybody to take. Anybody. And that's in Leviticus, as I said, chapter 25, verse 6. So the produce is out of the landowner's private jurisdiction and is considered ownerless. Okay? So if it's considered ownerless, well, then that pasuk doesn't really apply in the Shemitah year. Because how can you basically give up something you don't own? It belongs to the poor. You don't have to redeem it. In other words, if somebody's stolen it, they haven't stolen it. It's not yours. Okay? So obviously, we got to look at that because otherwise there's no example that would be given against Rav Yochanan if we're talking about items in the Shemitah year. Gavin?
Damon, you've frozen, eh? Damon, you've frozen.
Okay. Just hang on. Let's see if we can get a better spot. Can you see me, guys?
Damon, we can't hear you, eh?
I know.
You're breaking up.
Damon?
And your picture's frozen.
Okay, guys, am I back?
Yeah, we lost that minute and a half, eh?
Okay, so what it's saying is if you want to count it for the Shemitah year, then that's not an argument against Rav Yochanan, because in the Shemitah year, everything's ownerless. So you don't have to have a sign saying that the discrete ones are redeeming it. So if somebody steals off they're not in spiritual trouble. Because if it's ownerless and anybody can take it, there's no thievery. So then the original owner doesn't have power to prevent it anyway. So we obviously then not talking about in the Shemitah year. So what we're saying is the Gemara at this point interjects, right? And it explains for the produce is then ownerless and passers-by are permitted to partake of fruits that grow in other people's property. And then the Mishnah continues, but in the other years of the 7-year cycle, when passers-by are not permitted to take of the fruits growing in other people's property, then stuff the wicked one with the forbidden food and let him die. Okay, so it seems as though there are opinions that saying that basically only a passer. So you've got two different opinions here. You've got the discrete ones, and they say that, listen, they don't want a person to be responsible for theft or for spiritually consuming produce that hasn't been redeemed yet. So what they're going to do is put a couple of coins, and whatever was stolen, they're going to redeem it, even though they don't have possession of it. Rav Yochanan is saying you can't redeem something you don't have possession of because it's not in your control, in essence. So that's where they disagreeing. If it's by an anonymous Mishnah, Rav Yochanan can't agree. If it's concluded by Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, it's possible that he could disagree with him. So that's the discussion. And then there are two opinions. So the discrete one go above and beyond the duty to basically redeem the poor. But the majority opinion is stuff the wicked one and let them die. What does this mean? It basically means that if we shouldn't even mark our fields to warn them, because you don't need warning. I'm not talking about Gavin the Cohen grave. There you do need warning, because if you're a Cohen, you have to be a certain distance. But they're talking about specifically the vineyard and other things, that if you're going on somebody's property and taking something, what do you need it marked for, that it's prohibited for use during that 4th year? You should know that theft is prohibited, and therefore stuff the thief, and he should suffer the spiritual consequences. That's what it's saying. Why should he be warned that it hasn't been redeemed? He's not allowed to take it either way. So let him suffer the spiritual consequences. The discreet ones obviously don't feel that way, by the way. Do you hear the difference in argument, guys?
Damon, the discreet ones, that's the, is it relating to the person that wrote the Mishnah?
No, the discreet
Who's
ones
the discreet
are
ones?
they're a small group of pious people that didn't want anybody to sin. So even though the person...
Okay.
What they would do, they say they're discreet because they don't turn around and say, I did mitzvahs. They would secretly, after somebody stole it, redeem what was missing and take those coins equivalent to Jerusalem. So to say, listen, forgive the person, I've bought it. In other words, it were certain field owners that were very holy, and they didn't want that person to get into trouble for stealing their unredeemed vineyard. So they would basically forgive the person, but give them coins to take, give coins to be taken to Jerusalem to pay the financial equivalent of what was stolen, so that there would be no spiritual claim of theft against them in the next world, and they wouldn't be held accountable for consuming produce that was not allowed to be consumed until it had been redeemed itself. Otherwise, you have to take the grapes to be eaten in Jerusalem. Do you get what I'm saying? So many people didn't share that opinion, by the way. So how does this relate to Rav Yochanan? Is the Mishnah continues, but the discreet ones place down the coins, and they say whatever was picked from this vineyard shall be deconsecrated on these coins. So now this anonymous Mishnah, which cites the practice of the discreet ones, who would redeem the 4th year vineyard's fruits even after they were taken, maintains that even after an item is stolen, the original ownership is not considered impaired. So it's saying, how then does Rav Yochanan, who maintains that the halacha follows an anonymous Mishnah, rule that the original owner of a stolen article may not consecrate it because his ownership is impaired? Because what we learn here is that this anonymous Mishnah talking about the discreet ones is contradicting Rav Yochanan, who's talking about an anonymous Mishnah. So either he's talking about a different anonymous Mishnah, but he has to explain why he's not listening to this anonymous Mishnah, because he has to listen because it's anonymous. Because Rebbe said whenever there's an anonymous Mishnah, everybody has to listen to it. And this quoting the discreet ones is saying that even if you don't have ownership of the stolen item, you can still redeem it, is against Rav Yochanan, who says if the original owner doesn't have it in his possession, he doesn't really own it, and neither does the thief, because the thief doesn't have permission. So he's contradicting the halacha that he has to follow. So the Gemara says, well, how do you answer this? And it says, perhaps you will say in response, who taught in the Mishnah this practice of the discreet ones? In other words, who discussed this anonymous Mishnah? They're saying that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel taught it. Okay? And Rav Yochanan did not say that the halacha accords with the anonymous ruling of an individual. So in other words, the anonymous ruling of the discreet ones reported by Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. So in other words, in that particular case, he could technically argue against it. He could say, I don't follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Okay, even because it's not an anonymous Mishnah. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel discusses it also. So therefore, I hold I can argue with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. That's what the Mishnah is saying Rav Yochanan could say. Okay, but the problem is it wouldn't resolve the difficulty according to the Gemara, because Rabba Bava Kamma said in the name of Rav Yochanan, and this is a statement actually by Rav Yochanan himself. Wherever an opinion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is taught in our Mishnah, the law is in accordance with him, except for his opinion regarding a guarantor, the get that was given in Sidon, and the latter case of evidence in the 31st daf of Sanhedrin. But other than those three cases, you have to adhere to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, this is Rav Yochanan saying this. So it's saying it doesn't solve the problem, because if you're saying that the anonymous Mishnah was concluded by Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, Rav Yochanan would hold his opinion on this halachic issue, except for those three cases. So either way, it doesn't solve a problem, because it says in either event, even with Rav Yochanan, you'd have to accept the opinion of the discrete ones as per halacha, whether he goes by the anonymous Mishnah or Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel. So we're gonna work out, I think next time, how that actually is interpreted. Okay, we've got 5 minutes left. I don't think we have to go forward for the next 5 minutes.
Yeah, Damon, can you just, so that you're saying what the back and forth discussions are about, the whole thing was if a thief tried to consecrate, it's about consecration to the temple. It was already consecrated by the owner.
Well, consecration
is
just no. Consecration is one issue, only one issue. So consecration is the perfect example. Why? Because can you see me?
Yes, it's a bit dark because the.
Okay, because it's just give me a second, guys. 1 sec. Getting dark. Pull down the space. It's a decent broker that you're going to say on 90. Okay.
Who is it?
So, what I was going to say is consecration is a perfect example, because what Rav Yochanan is saying is, look, the thief doesn't own it because the original owner didn't give up hope and despair. So the thief can't acquire it through despair. Okay, but the original owner's so he can't consecrate it. And the original owner's got a problem because he can't consecrate it, and then the thief just pay him the principal back, and he would have to, he would have a bit of a problem. Why? Because you can only consecrate something that's in your possession. That's the problem. And he said basically if the thief did sell it or slaughter it, he'd be liable to the fourfold or fivefold payment. The only reason why there's no liability to the fourfold or fivefold payment is because there's a consecration, but it's only after the original owner despaired. Because if there was no despair, you can't consecrate what's not yours. But if you do it after despair and you've given it up, well, then the thief owns it, technically. But even in that case, you would wonder why there's no four or fivefold payment, even after despair. And the reason being because it's consecrated, it's going to Hekdesh. And your fourfold and fivefold payment is only if you steal it from the original owner. So why is it twofold? Because it was stolen from the original owner from his home and then consecrated. But the bottom line of the argument is you would need something in your possession as the original owner in order to do something with it, to use it, to consecrate it, to sell it, to do anything. Because practically, what are you going to do with something that's not in your hands, even if the thief doesn't technically own it? Whereas Reish Lakish is saying that basically holds by the Mishnah of Ma'aser Sheni chapter 5 verse 1 of the discrete one, saying it doesn't have to be in your possession to own it. So therefore, in that particular case, the thief can consecrate it, and the original owner can consecrate it. So that's why the thief doesn't have a problem. So they're dealing with this issue of, can you do something with it if it's not in your possession? Basically, that's the issue. Do you see the issue?
But why? I know that that's the case, but if the owner, if he's still the owner, even though it's not in his position, why should that be a problem?
Well,
why is it such a big deal? You know what I mean?
If I don't have my car, and I want to give, if I want to give Gavin my car, and somebody stole my car, how can I practically give it to Gavin?
Okay, fair enough. But okay, because you have to physically, handing over is like a kinyan by the temple.
Yeah,
you give it to him. You relinquish ownership, and the temple makes a kinyan for that's it has to be an actual act, like a tangible.
According to some
act.
opinions, according to other opinions, it's like what you originally said. Your intention is enough, even though it's not in your possession at the time, to let the guy off the hook. I mean, I think there was a story of the Chofetz Chaim or the Chazon Ish, that somebody stole his valuables, and when he ran off, he said to the thief, "I forgive you. I give it to you. I give it to you," because he didn't want him to have a sin. But that's holding at a high level. Yeah.